Hello everyone. In the previous video we talked about C++ classes. More specifically, we talked about the constructor and the destructor. We created two constructors for our class, a unparameterized default constructor and a parameterized default constructor. And then we implemented it in a file. We also talked about the destructor and implemented the destructor. And in this video, we're going to talk about the copy constructor. And the copy constructor is called whenever your class needs to make a copy of the same class data type itself. Meaning, whenever the shape2D class needs to make a copy of another instance of a shape2D class, with the copy constructor, we get to define the behavior of what happens when we take a copy of ourselves. So the convention for creating a copy constructor is quite similar on how we create a default constructor. We are going to be using the same name as the class. However, here the arguments are going to be different. Since I'm taking a copy, I will need shape2D. And I will give it an argument like shape. However, when it comes to taking a copy of another class, we could run into the possibility that this class is huge, and in the future someone else might add a lot of data to this class and might make it gigantic. And if we're taking copies of a gigantic class, this could take up a long time. So instead of making this copy constructor as a pass by value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it pass by reference. And since I'm taking a reference to a shape, I could run into the possibility of accidentally modifying it. And that's something that I do not want to do. So in case of that, we will augment our input with a const keyword. So here I'm going to get a reference to the same data type as itself, but I'm going to make it constant so that way I don't edit it, right? Because I'm getting a reference to this class, I can run into the trouble of modifying it when I don't intend to. However, I can save from that problem by putting the const keyword here. So how do we go about implementing the shape2D copy constructor? Well, we will do that. Here we declare it, and here we will do that in shape2D. I will put it in between the parameterized default constructor and the destructor just to keep the consistent declaration with what I declared in my header file. So here I want to let my computer know that the copy constructor is going to belong to the shape2D class. So I do that by saying shape2D : so I know that this belongs to the shape2D class. And since we're doing a copy constructor, it's going to have the same name as our class. And let's be consistent. I will say shape2D, and I will get a reference to my shape. So what are we going to do when we have our copy constructor? Well, what I'll do is I'll say length is equal to shape.length. And the width is equal to shape.width. So the idea with copy constructors is that you take the private data that it has itself and you copy it to the private data of the class that's taking a copy of this. Right, so the idea is that if I have a class that wants to take a copy of this shape, here's how I'd like to do it. The internal class that's calling it will like to access each private member of the shape class that I'm taking a copy of it of and copy it to its own internal data. You might come into a case where there are more complicated data where you have something like even dynamically allocated data. If it comes to this, one thing that you need to be aware of is that you need to make sure that the data should be able to take a copy of itself. Right, so there's two tests that you need to test with your copy constructor to make sure that things don't break. That your copy constructor is able to take a copy of other classes, and that your copy constructor is able to take copies of itself. This is very important because you might have code that could be error prone if your class is taking a copy of itself. Anyways, here we will build and we will see if, well, here's how we call it in the main program. I will say shape 2D. I will say my third shape. And I can take a copy of my shape or my second shape. Now let's do my shape. Right, so here is the call to take a copy of, well, here we're calling the copy constructor. Right, here I have my shape, which is shape 2D, and I'm using it as an argument to take a copy of whatever's in here and copy it into my third shape. Right, so this is the syntax for creating it. And here we will build to see if there's any errors. And there is not. The build succeeded. There is no failed builds. We are good. In the next video, what I'll do is that we'll cover something that's also quite important for creating classes. They are called setters and getters. Thanks for watching.